Hello, my name is Sebastian Turner. In this video I'm going to try to answer the core questions of what is prostitution, what is sex trafficking, what countries have high rates of prostitution, what countries have high rates of sex trafficking, and most importantly, is there a link between sex trafficking and prostitution, and if so, should prostitution then be made legal or illegal to combat this problem? Before we begin, it's highly important that we define our terms and try to understand how these systems work. What is sex trafficking? The Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, also known as TVPA, states that sex trafficking is the recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, patronizing, or soliciting of an individual through means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of commercial sex. However, it is important to note that it is not necessary to demonstrate force, fraud, or coercion in sex trafficking cases involving children younger than the age of 18. What is prostitution? Well, Merriam-Webster defines prostitution as the act or practice of engaging in promiscuous sexual relations, especially for money. Now that we understand our terms, it's time to see how sex trafficking works. Victims of human trafficking are frequently lured by false promises of lucrative job, stability, education, or a loving relationship. Victims can be men or women, adults or children, foreign nationals or U.S. citizens. While they share the trait of vulnerability, victims have diverse ethnic, socioeconomic backgrounds, varied levels of education, and may be documented or undocumented. Domestic victims tend to come from foster homes or children who have been abandoned by their families. They are typically lured in with the idea of seeing the world or maybe just providing a false chance at the love they never received. Foreign-born victims of sex trafficking tend to be lured in by the thought of creating a better life for themselves than where they lived. According to the UN's Global Report on Trafficking in Persons, the origin of these foreign-born sex workers tends to be South American, Sub-Saharan African, South Asian, or East Asian. When they get into their target country, the reason why they might be silent instead of reporting the crimes that are done against them is because they or their family back home might be targeted. They themselves could be deported, making all their efforts pointless. When it comes to prostitution, how it works is remarkably simple. Supply and demand. As we are on some level still animals, our brains release dopamine and other various pleasurable chemicals whenever an orgasm happens. People want to have those feelings as often as they can, though they rarely fulfill them. This inability means that people will pay to get those feelings, and there's the demand. Then the suppliers, i.e. the prostitutes, realize that they can collect on that money if they perform the service. Now that we have all this background information, we can truly begin in earnest. Does prostitution have any link with sex trafficking? In a massive study conducted using data from over 150 countries, using only statistical analysis, it was found that decriminalizing prostitution led to more sex trafficking. The three main core countries that were really focused on was Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. These three countries changed their prostitution laws between 1996 and 2003, hoping to curb human trafficking inflows. For Germany, they had a number before and after the law was passed to see if it helped the human trafficking. However, Sweden and Denmark did not have these numbers available, and so these countries were compared between the two as they both have very similar geography and only slightly different economic systems. At the time, Sweden had completely banned sex work in all its forms, and because of this, it decreased the number of workers practicing openly. However, critics have said that the workers simply moved to the internet instead. At the time as well, Denmark legalized prostitution for individuals, but not brothels or pimps. And afterwards they found that the number of sex trafficking victims was 4 times that of Sweden. And in all the other countries, excluding 2, this happened in every single situation. Regardless of whether or not pimps, brothels, or even just commercial companies specializing in sex were legal, there was almost always a statistical significant increase in human trafficking. With this in mind, the question of whether or not prostitution should be legal would be obvious. However, the issue is still a prevailing problem even when it is illegal. So what can be done? It's easy to criticize something but give no potential solution. So here's one. One of the ways that has been proposed by a number of activism organizations and the United Nations is by making prostitution legal but heavily regulating it, focusing on accountability and safety for both parties. One of the plans would be to make streetwalkers illegal outright, but allow prostitution only at licensed brothels. Then on top of this fact, there would need to be a system in place that gives these sex trafficking victims the ability to claim refugee status. After all, the fact that they became victims in the first place already shows that the place that they just left has active members of the community practicing human slavery. The hope that this idea tries to give is that the victims of sex trafficking could immediately out their traffickers to the police and know that they themselves will not be arrested for being illegal immigrants or practicing the profession. The accountability portion would be the fact that these brothel owners / managers would have to know who these prostitutes are and if they actually want to do this service. This could be done by having them sign a consent form and ensuring that they have legal status in the region to ensure that they're not being exploited. Then on top of this, they would need to have an out available to the sex workers if a customer perhaps gets too rowdy or if they find themselves in some kind of danger. Thank you for listening, and this is the end of my project. In it, we tried to discuss what is prostitution, what is sex trafficking, what countries have high rates of prostitution, what countries have high rates of sex trafficking, and most importantly, whether or not there is a link between the two, and if there was, what we should do about it. Thank you very much and have a nice day.